Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to people all around the world. Dan Cosgrove here. It's been a while, I know. But I wanted to hop on here today because I've got a special friend that I wanted to share the good news about. He's a guy that I've gotten to know over the past couple of months, and I think the world of him with what him and his family have been doing for the past 3 decades. Because everybody knows, I like talking about personal finance. I like trying to create generational wealth. I like trying to help people help themselves. And if it wasn't for this person here, I wouldn't have gotten a big aha moment for myself. And so his name's Nick Burgess. He hails from the West Coast. So thank you for joining me during your lunchtime. But him and his family have, for the last 3 decades, been working on premium financing. And if you don't know what premium financing is, well, get your popcorn out because this is going to be a fun conversation for the next 45 minutes where Nick is really going to walk us through the foundational elements of not just what is premium financing, but also how you actually want to properly structure it and what to look out for when people start talking to you about premium financing so you're selecting the right group to work with so that you can ultimately put yourself and your family in the best position financially. So Nick, hop on here. How are you doing today?
Doing good, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate you taking some time out of the day. I know you guys were off in Mexico last week doing some important trips, and so I'm glad we were able to get you back on here because ever since we started talking, you've had my head spinning with some of the impressive things that the Burgess Group has been doing over the past couple of decades, and now it's my job to try and help more people understand how exactly you guys are doing it. So I know I asked you in advance, like if you could pull up a deck to kind of walk us all through, because I know some people are visual learners, but I'd love if possible, if you do have a deck, if you can walk us through that, and I'll just kind of ask some questions as we go. But please inform me, inform the people that will be watching this.
For sure. Yeah, I've got it pulled up, and we'll just go through it.
All right, let me get you on there then. So, all right, cool. Have at it.
Okay. Well, again, I appreciate the opportunity. I think for those that are familiar with premium finance and those that are not, this will be, I think, at the very least, educational. I think with premium finance, just in general, there's nothing magical about it. It's leverage. And there seems to be over the last probably 15 years more groups more than ever that are dabbling in this space, in the premium finance space. And I think that's the issue with premium finance is you've got everyone under the sun dabbling, and that's really where premium finance falls apart.
Sure.
And some of the components to that are, I mean, if you just break down the risks of premium finance, it's three risks. It's how do you control interest rates on the bank loan side? How do you keep collateral, which is the client's skin in the game? How do you keep that manageable? And then the third risk is what's the likelihood of the bank calling the loan? And that's
Yep.
what makes or breaks a good transaction from a bad one. And, we recognize that. And like you said, we recognize that 32 years ago now. My father started it. I obviously haven't been in it for 32 years. It's my 15th year. But point being is we recognize, look, if we're going to jump in this space, we're not going to dabble. This is all we do, and we really stay in our lane. We don't do anything else. And, I emphasize that because it makes a big difference because these are long-term plays and the management of these over the next 10, 15, 20 years
Mm-hmm.
is even more important than the onboarding of the client. And if you've got groups out there that are looking for the onboarding part, because yes, that's how everyone gets paid at that onboarding part. But if you don't have the back team to manage this for the next 10, 15, 20 years, which is a very heavy lift, then you really have nothing
Yep.
because these absolutely have to be monitored. And that's, again, one major area where we shine is that's our entire back team is focused on that. That's given that this is all we do. But if we get into just the basics, who we are, again, a family business. We have offices really all over the country. A majority in the West Coast, like you said, Our main office is in Salt Lake City. We have an office in LA, San Diego, Miami, New York, and then I'm in our Seattle office. We also do international work as well. We have an office in Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Leon. We do some work in Asia, Europe, and whatnot, but those are the main areas where we have an actual presence. Um, uh, 75% of our work is always going to be domestic.
Yep.
But regardless, if we just get into the nuts and bolts of premium finance, again, it's leverage. We're using life insurance as the vehicle, and we're funding it with banks' money. And in doing so, it's a much more efficient way to procure life insurance for high net worth individuals.
Yeah.
And
What
I
do you
think that's a
characterize as
big
high net
key.
worth, Nick?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Our baseline is you have to have a 10 million net worth,
Okay.
500,000 plus income, and 2 million of liquidable assets. That's the entry level.
Okay. Got it. Got it. So it's not for the faint of heart. Yeah, you certainly have to build up a pretty good nest egg to be able to qualify for this.
Yeah, and I think that's a key component of how we differentiate
Yep.
right from the start. Is there a big market for individuals in that $2 to $8 million range? And absolutely, there's a huge market. That's where premium finance, where the horror stories come from. Because the reality is if everyone could do premium finance, they would, but it's not for everybody. And you've got people selling this as a commodity,
Yep.
which it is not. And you've got people pushing that it's free insurance, that there is no risk, which that couldn't be further from the truth. There's
Yep.
always risk,
Yep.
and it's not free. But the reality is if you have a net worth lower than the 10 million, what is your actual need? And B, the size of the loan is going to be too small for you to actually be able to carve away some of the fat that on the bank loan side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we, at a minimum, stick with the 10 million net worth. Our average clients in that 50 to 70, million dollar range. But
Yep.
that's one key component is what is the fat or what is the rate that the bank is lending? And there's no, again, I keep saying there's no magic behind it. And I mean that in that we we own a book of business with, we have about 14 lenders that we work with, and with our top 5 banks we own the book of business over the last 30 years, that's anywhere from $500 million to over $1 billion with each of our banks.
Yep.
And by having that, we can now consistently carve away a lot of the fat associated to the rate at which the money is being lent at. Sure. And that's the difference between us and, say, someone dabbling in it. And you're just not going to get there with, overnight. We got there over the 30 years of doing this, and
Yeah.
and that's why we can consistently have leverage over some of these banks.
And that, I think that's what stuck out to me when we initially had our conversations. Is I had a rough idea of what the ballpark looks like from a percentage markup, and you guys were very competitive and have a very strong value proposition that goes above and beyond what the normal people have. So I know you've got your deck, so I'll go back over to that. So please.
Yeah, well, no, and I agree. I mean, that's one key factor that everyone should be looking at right there. Anyone can say they can get this rate or that rate, but again, until you have it in a term sheet and you can put it on paper from the bank that's binding, then you really don't have anything. And that's what, we can put our money where our mouth is, and deliver on that. And we can, because we, again, own these books of business with the banks. If banks don't, and why we have multiple banks, if banks don't honor what we've built over the last 20 plus years with them, we'll move the loans. We'll move not just the loan with one client, we'll move our whole book of business. So we, again, now have that leverage over the bank to keep them honest, if you will. And that's, I think, a huge component.
Yeah, that's great.
So if you just look at, okay, well, what can premium finance solve? What are some of the needs we see with clients? It's one of the beauties of this type of transaction. Again, if they can qualify and they have a need, well, then we can shape and mold it to fit a number of different things. And some of the lowest hanging fruit is offsetting the estate tax,
Mm-hmm.
or adding additional income, and this is one of the fastest growing areas that we work in, and another differentiator is what we're doing in the charitable space. It's a fantastic tool to amplify gifts, impact investing, or foundation funding, and that's probably 30% of our business right now, but that's growing rapidly.
Interesting. So 30% of your business right now is kind of in that charitable field.
Yeah, yeah. Because it really, we're seeing more and more high net worth individuals where, they're wanting to solve the estate tax, as that's the
Sure.
low hanging fruit for a lot of the individuals in that 10 million or up net worth, especially with the sunset provision coming, right? But another piece of this is it's not just one solve. You could blend a couple of solves into this. So we're seeing more and more high net worth individuals going, look, I want to carve out what I need for G2 so they're not getting hit with a big estate tax bill.
Yeah.
But I don't need them to also get an additional 25 million on top of what I'm already solving for them for the estate tax. I don't need to ruin them, or I don't want to ruin them.
Yeah.
They're going to be fine. So they're going, I'd like to, give a portion of this to charity. So we have some proprietary structures that we get into the mech side, where we can mech these policies and solve any of the phantom tax issues that are created by a financed mech, which ultimately leads into what clients' needs are in the philanthropic space. And so it's been a really nice blending of the two, where we can solve, an estate tax and give to charity, or
Yeah.
add additional income and give some to charity. And so it's a pretty interesting tool.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, some other areas, we do a lot with family offices, as this is a great tool to pass wealth on in perpetuity, and preserve that wealth, or asset protection. And on the corporate planning side, it's a really efficient way for a corporation to create a golden handcuff, buy, sell, uh,
Mm-hmm.
non-qualified deferred comp type play. I mean, how many buy sells are out there but are not being funded correctly? Well, this is a much more efficient way to fund it, and again, keep the balance sheets of the company intact.
Yeah, certainly.
But one for some of the basics of just premium finance is, if we put our banking hat on, is why would a bank be willing to do this? As we look at it from a standpoint of, these end up being very conservative loans for banks. And in this example that you see in front of you, let's say uh, we were going to tap into a $10 million death benefit. And to fund the premiums in this, we're going to overfund it and dump, say, 5 million into the policy, over a 5-6 year period. The cash outlay for the client in this example is going to be zero. They're not going to pay the premium, and we have the ability for the banks to capitalize the interest on the loan. So the out of pocket is zero for the client. That doesn't mean I'm saying it's free. Where there's skin in the game, and where this becomes, in premium finance done correctly, so efficient for both the bank and the insured, is that, okay, we've got an outstanding loan of 5 million out there. Well, the first assignment the bank takes is on the policy cash value, and by
Hmm.
how we fund this, right, we get these policies to equate to 95% of what the bank lent day one. So day one, the cash value equals 4.5, and the premium is 5. So there's really only a shortfall of 500,000, and
Yeah.
that's the skin in the game for the client, right? That would be in the form of collateral, but hey, collateral is an asset that they encumber or leverage, and it stays on their balance sheet. And what you can use as collateral could be stocks, bonds, cash, CDs. We have some banks that'll accept art, or we can even use real estate. We've got banks that can accept real estate in the form of a standby letter of credit or a line of credit. We even have some banks that'll do a Zillow value. So flexibility, and these are assets that these clients already have that they can keep on their balance sheet, leverage as collateral to create a whole new asset on the back end,
Yeah.
which
Wow.
becomes Interesting.
And so with that collateral though, so they're not physically having to like say divest of $500,000 in stock. They just have to have
No.
that stock be allocated or spoken for as collateral for this, right?
Correct. We have some banks where they are, our top banks are going to want a bank, what's called a banking relationship, which
Yeah.
could be $1 million, which would require a client to move if they have if they're going to use stocks as a collateral, they would need to move those stocks over to
Yeah.
give the bank an AUM opportunity. But we also have banks where the banks don't need the AUM, and we can keep those assets custodialized with the client and their advisor. So again, because our goal is not to disrupt any relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So if a client's saying, I want to use my stock portfolio, but I don't want to make a relationship with the bank, I want to keep it where it's at, we
Yeah.
can do that. And there's
Wow.
a control agreement put in place. And the asset manager of that client maintains the assets. They're still getting paid on that. They're making all the decisions, and the bank just simply takes an assignment on that.
That's pretty cool. Okay, I like that. So it's yes, I have to post a collateral position, but I'm not sacrificing anyways. I I almost liken it if I know some wealthy people, they like to use asset secure loans a lot of times. So it's a way for them to essentially
Right.
double dip on the dollar for them to be able to use that dollar twice to still get them more what they want.
Correct. So the
Okay.
IRR becomes off the charts
Yep. Correct.
because now you're using an asset that was already sitting there.
Yep.
And this pie chart shows the same thing in that as these policies grow, or as time goes on, these policies grow in value, and it starts to shrink the collateral assignment on, say, that 500,000. So in year one, it shows you, okay, the first primary asset that's being used as collateral is the policy cash value. So that's the 4.5 million. And the shortfall, which is the 500,000, is the silver area, which is being posted as a outside collateral from the client. Now, 5 years down the road, that policy is going to grow in value, thus shrinking the assignment on the 500,000 of personal collateral from the client. And then you get 10 years down the road, and what's happened is the out personal collateral from the investment account is gone. The policy is now self-sustaining and
Okay.
totally collateralized itself. And we just created this policy that's self-sustaining by tapping into their mortality and using the bank's money to do it. And in this case, the bank paid the premium and carried the interest. And they're going to do that throughout the life of the transaction. The bank doesn't get paid off until death.
Yeah.
And the reason the bank's okay to do this is they're fully secured. These are backed by financially sound carriers. So, like we have multiple banks we use
Yep.
because we want to keep the banks honest, we truly are carrier agnostic. So, I'm not pushing a product with a certain carrier. I don't have to hit numbers. We're going to stay within the top 1% of the most highly rated carriers out there because that's why banks are comfortable, as long as these are financially sound carriers. But we do that because at the end of the day, this is planning, and no client need or transaction is the same.
So Nick, a quick question on this. So I know the collateral comes down over the course of 10 years. And a lot of people
Yes.
like to utilize this to have, cash value on day one, kind of from that infinite banking concept. If somebody's collateralized though and they're taking a loan for premium finance, when would you think it would actually be the right time for them to actually have this as a vehicle where they can create their infinite banking concept and take loans against it versus continuing to just keep the money in there as is, don't touch it until that collateral position shrinks to next to nothing after year 10?
Yeah. No, my first answer to that would be, and I know you and I have talked about it, but my first answer to that would be they're looking at the wrong tool because insurance is a long term play, right?
Yep.
And anytime, whether you're financing it or paying for insurance, uh, uh, income day one, while it's doable, is my personal opinion is they're already off basis because insurance is a long term play. It's a
Yep.
slow grow,
Yep.
um, and I think that their mindset needs to shift. We can create income on these
Hmm.
but they need a little time, and
Sure.
there's never something for nothing. So if they're wanting income super early, well then that just means they're going to have to post more collateral.
Yep.
But if they can do that, then they can do that. But they need to
Sure.
know exactly what that collateral looks like and what the impact is. But I would always say in these transactions, when we're going in, they are long-term plays, and that gets into our team, right? We're going to be here. We're once we put a client into this, we're really married to it, and we're going to be here doing this with them on an annual basis, monitoring where the interest rates are, where the performance of the product is, and where collateral is going. Every year for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And
Okay.
that's key.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
This next slide, I think, really helps because it helps you kind of look at, okay, the power of leverage done correctly and what we're talking about here. So, and this is a newer slide that I don't think you've seen, but
Yeah, I
let's
haven't. This
say
is
we had
cool. I like this.
right, every client, let's say a client had $1 million and they
Yeah.
didn't know what to do with it, right? And we said, okay, let's look at a couple different options. If you had $1 million, what if you put it into a traditional investment fund growing at 10%? How would that do over the next 20, 25 years compared to paying for premiums or compared to financing premiums, right? And it's just the same $1 million. So if we look at the graph here, the blue graph, or the blue dot, that's the $1 million going into the fund. And how would that perform over 25 years, growing at 10%? In 25 years, you're going to have about $10.8 million. Now, that's great, but you're going to be paying taxes on that. And now, how would that compare to, say, putting $1 million into permanent life insurance? And in this example, we'll be using a universal life, an index universal life product. And if you do $1 million into an insurance product, and say we dumped it, 100,000 or 200,000 in over 100,000 over 10 years, or 200,000 over 5 years. Again, not necking it, but how would that perform? And it ends up buying 5.4 million right out of the bat. You've got cash value growth going on, and if you compare that to $1 million in an investment account, the first 15 years, it's a better route to go, right? Then you get out 20 years, and you're starting to see that it's not outperforming it by much, and then you get out to 25 years, and the investment fund is outperforming the overall return in the policy. However, right, the 7.5 million in 25 years is tax free, depending on how it's owned. Would
Yep.
obviously have it in a trust outside of their estate, but point being is that's 7.5 million that's 100% income and estate tax free,
Sure.
and where to compare to 10.8 million and whatever they're
Capital
after
gains on that.
taxes. So right, you could you can measure that. Well, in the third example, the purple graph, what if we're saying if you do both, being financing being the key here. So we say take that same $1 million, put it into the investment fund, growing 10%, and now that is collateral. So now, what if that $1 million is working in that investment fund, and again, you leverage it as collateral for a bank to pay premiums into a policy and supercharge that same IUL policy? And now you look at that, they're both working for you. If you look at that over 25 years, now we've created a $29.5 million pool. 10.8 of that is going to be taxed capital gains, because 10.8 of it is the $1 million that was in that fund. And that, remember, that as it's posted as collateral, it was growing for you the entire time. You're still paying taxes on it. But the other 19.5 million is the insurance dollars that was paid by the bank. And that's 100% income and estate tax free. And you can see by doing financing and leverage how much of an impact that creates.
Yeah. So that's okay. So this is an impressive graph here. So if I understand this properly, utilizing it through, because the gray line is somebody that's just doing a typical IUL type policy financing. They're not getting any additional support. And in that one, we can see it more or less competes with the traditional investment growth. It does minimize some of the headaches or risks that a lot of people stress about, especially as they near their retirement years. But with yours, somebody that utilizes this, so of course, as long as they had the money up front to be able to participate in this, they have the protections in place, so they don't have that downside risk of being in the blue line, and they're more or less getting a lot of that tax-free growth. I know you said about 19 million of that is tax-free. The other 10 is going to be subject to some of the investment growth, right?
Well, yeah, just saying. Look, if you just look at the first two, the blue traditional investment growth or
Yeah.
just paying for insurance, you can see after 25 years,
Yep.
it's spades. But
Yep.
if you
Correct.
said, okay, well, what if you just stuck you stayed with the option one being traditional investment growth, and that's just what you have there.
Yeah.
Now you leverage that million that's in that fund as collateral,
Yep.
and we finance a policy. That's how much more efficient this becomes. You've already got the investment sitting there.
Yep.
You're using an asset that was already invested. It's growing, doing its thing. And if you leverage that as collateral and to purchase a policy, how much more uh, 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 value you get, right? Again, 10.8 of that 29 million is what you had in collateral, and you're still paying taxes on it, right?
Yeah.
As you would anytime. And it bought way more insurance because we funded it more efficiently through financing.
Now, I personally love the idea of leverage. I know some people are fearful of leverage. How do we
Sure.
minimize that risk? Because when, of course, you're leveraged, things could go in reverse on you. And we've seen, of course, interest rates are certainly not favorable for a lot of people right now. So, how do we
Mm-hmm.
adjust for that?
Yeah, so it gets into this three-legged stool
Okay.
approach on, okay, how do we, again, breaking down what the risks of premium finance are. How do you control interest rates? Well, that gets into the first leg of the stool. How do we help control mitigate? You cannot take that risk off the table, but you can mitigate it, which is what the first leg of the stool is. We do that through our credit chassis management, where it's flexibility that we built with all 13, 14 lenders that we work with, where we can do our loans in any one of the G7 currencies. We can lock rates in 3, 5, 7, even 10 years using swaps, caps, or collars. Again, our term loans, we have 1 year term loans out to 20-year term loans. We have all the flexibility in the world that we need to have in order to provide clients with options. That flexibility helps. But then again, going back to the bank spread, what is the fat associated to the bank spread? And that's the fat that the bank is charging. We are able to cut that fat away because of the book of business we own with these banks. So, anyone doing premium finance could could throw out this type of flexibility. But where the rubber hits the road is, what is their bank spread? And their bank spread, we're typically, compared to any other competition out there in the market, we're typically 75 to 85 basis points lower than anyone else out there in the market because of the book of business that we own with these banks. So that makes a massive difference when talking about risk within premium finance. So you get into the product, which is the second leg of the stool, right? Because those are where interest rates and where we're borrowing money at. Well, now if we have an interest rate and where we're borrowing money at, we have to offset that with the crediting rate or the growth inside these insurance policies. And so that's why having as lean bank spreads as you can is huge. But the products that we work with are whole life, universal life, and index universal life. 90% of our clients are going to utilize index universal life products. Regardless, all of these products that we use have three characteristics that we need at all times, which is very important within premium finances. They all have a guarantee of principal. They have minimum floors and ceilings built into them. And the fixed accounts in these products correlate with interest rate volatility. So they're gonna move with interest rates on the fixed side. On the index side, they're not going to correlate, but that's nice to have both correlating and non-correlating products. Now, that's a lot of jargon. So just looking at how these products work
Yeah, and
is
sorry,
this
Nick, a
next.
quick question there. So I know you mentioned about 90% of them people go down the IUL route instead of like a whole life. Why do you see that? Is it just better upside growth potential, or what's the main reasoning for it?
Yeah, frankly, and I'll just call it as I see it. If anyone's been doing this long enough, the reality is whole life. While it's a great product, I started it. I started at Northwestern. I worked at Mass Mutual. I know whole life. I own whole life. It's a great product. It's not a great product for premium finance, period, because it just creates too much of a lag. It's the cost of insurance is too high, and just the way whole life functions, you're never going to get out from under or have an arbitrage from whatever the loan is, regardless of how lean your loan is. The only way to make whole life work is you're going to the client is going to be required to pay interest, which is fine. If a client wants to pay interest, we have plenty of clients that pay interest, then whole life can work, like in that 10-pay chassis. But what if your client has already used up their lifetime gift exemption? What if, and if you don't have a handle on the bank spread, right, and your bank spread is already pretty fat, then those interest payments can end up being more than premium payments. So then you're getting into the issue of, well, why didn't I just pay for insurance, right? So having, again, flexibility. I'm never going to push and force a client to pay interest if they have the wherewithal and understanding that, hey, we can post this purely in a collateral play. So again, having that flexibility, and when you just look at the raw numbers, an IUL is going to blow whole life or universal life out of the water 99% of the time. And this next slide kind of shows you why.
Okay.
So how a typical IUL works is what you see here. You're going to play within the shaded area. You're going to have a floor of 0. Most IULs right now we're seeing around 10% cap. We have some carriers that are at the 11, 12%. And as interest rates stay high, you're going to see those floors and ceilings move up and down. They're going to move with it, the floors and ceilings. So the last decade we had, low interest rates, lower than we've ever seen. And you saw caps go from 10 down to around 7.5, 8%. Now, as rates have gone up again, you're starting to see the floors are always at 0, never going to go below 0. But now as rates have gone up, you're starting to see those floors go from 0 to 1 or 2. And you're starting to see those caps go back up from 8, 9, 10, again, up to 12%. And so the top carriers out there are going to do that because they need to stay competitive with the environment. But if we just look at a standard 0 floor and a cap of 10, that's where the product's going to play, and it's going to mirror a different indice like, say, the S&P 500. So if we're mirroring the S&P 500 on an annual point-to-point, there's the actual S&P. That's the S&P from 94 to 23. And here's how the product performed. In orange, as you can see, you're not going to get those extreme highs, right? You're capped at 10, but the beauty is I just eliminated all the negative, as you know, right? And that makes these IULs so powerful, because eliminating the negative is what makes these attractive. If I look at the average crediting rate of where these IULs have performed, it's over the last 30 years or 20 years, just going off of that, the average is probably about 7.18%. Now, the next line I'm going to show you is purple. That's where we've actually been borrowing money at. Not in different currencies, that's just US dollar, but that's where we've been borrowing money at over the last 30 years of doing this. And what I hope people can see in this is that we've been able to maintain an arbitrage of where we're gaining money through the product faster than we're borrowing. Yeah. And that's a key component to premium finance.
Yeah. I mean, that arbitrage is huge there. And I mean, even on those years, and there's going to be years where the market is 0% growth, it's not like there's a significant interest being paid. I'm curious if you guys have like another chart that also shows which years are a positive arbitrage versus which years might be negative arbitrage. Because, we know the market's going to be down sometimes.
For sure. Well, that'll get into the next slide here. This is this shows you again, starting on the left side of this graph, actual performance and where those have been. So the first column is the actual S&P from 94 to 23, and where the next column is where the index IUL product has performed, mirroring it.
Yeah.
In 94, when you got negative 1.5, again, you stop at 0. When we were up in 95, 34%, you stopped at 10.
Yeah.
But what you're seeing is when any year there was a 0, it's followed by some caps. And then the worst we've seen it was 2000, 2001, and 2, where we had 3 years of negative. You got 3 zeros.
Yeah.
And it's followed by caps, a 3 and a cap and a 0 and 2 more caps. So overall, if you just average that out, that was about 7.18, 7.2%.
And
Now,
this is
if we look
showing
at the
cap,
third, right?
and you're showing the cap part, and I know a lot of the IUL policies I like putting people in, they're uncapped, which I'm sure shows probably a little bit more upside than in those situations.
It does. And that next, after this slide gets into the uncapped, because
Oh,
you're
okay.
exactly right. The uncapped products, as you know, they weren't around back then. They're more, 2019, 2020.
Yep.
And they've, as you know, they've been a game changer. It's just even better fuel in the engine. But if we just look at capped, right, starting out, let's look at, okay, the next column over is where we've been lending money at.
Mm-hmm.
We were used to be lending money in LIBOR, now we're in SOFR, and those are actual where those rates were each year. Now, the fat on top of that is the bank spread that we're adding on top of that is the next column over, which you see in the top there of 100 or 1.35%. That's the bank spread we start at. If you add that into the rates you see there, that would be our actual all-in borrowing rate. And if you ultimately take that final number and you compare that to where the product performed,
yeah,
the last column is the actual arbitrage we've been able to maintain over the last 20 plus years we've been doing this. If you look at the bottom there, we've been able to maintain a 2.7% arbitrage.
Wow.
And that is, how does that compare? Where do the numbers fall apart? Well, knowing that we've been able to maintain 2.7%, when we show numbers to clients going forward, we are super conservative. And I think that's another area where other groups aren't sensitive, is you got to be conservative, because that's what's going to dictate sticker shock on years rates shoot up like we saw in 21, 22, right? But anyways, when we're showing illustrations for clients going forward, we can't predict the future. So we're going to show an assumed arbitrage of 1%, 1.5%, and 2%.
Yeah.
And we're never going to go above 2% because ultimately the numbers play out just fine at any one of those pieces. If we do better than 2%, which we know we have, the numbers are pretty much off the charts. So it's yeah. Now on those uncapped products, that arbitrage is even bigger. Again, the uncapped products are the same as what we just showed before. As you know, you're going to have a floor of 0, but now you're uncapped. Here's the actual S&P. It's not going to mirror the S&P, as you know, on an annual point-to-point like the capped products. It's more of a volatility control type play. So it's going to be a little bit different. And that's the orange line that you see there. As you see, it's not mirroring it identically.
Yep.
But it's still, being uncapped makes these attractive. And if you look at, again, where we were borrowing money at, the arbitrage is even greater. If you look at the average with these uncapped products, the averages, are in those mid 9% ranges, which is, even better. If you do that same litmus test, a lot of columns here, but we just look at the starting with the 1 year H factor product, and you look at the bottom there. These are all the uncapped products, just with one carrier, because there's 5 or 6 carriers out there. Otherwise, and we're just showing 100 different states. But the point is, if we were showing where we've been, the averages we've been able to maintain with back testing on these uncapped products, it's some big returns. We've
Yeah.
been basically with a 2% bank spread, the very last column there, we've still been able to maintain over 6%, regardless if we're showing a capped product or an uncapped product. I'm never going to show an arbitrage above 2%,
Yep.
knowing that we blow that out of the water with
That's
an
crazy.
uncapped product. So we're conservative.
Yeah. Wow. That's impressive.
And the last leg of the stool really is, I think, the glue to everything, and that's the legal component. Schematics of how this is set up is
Yep.
we're typically going to set up an ILET grantor type trust that's defective for income tax purposes,
And Nick,
and
you want to explain exactly what an islet type trust is so that people kind of understand that?
well, I mean, ultimately, the ILET is going to be the entity that owns the policy, so that we can get these policies outside of their estate. So when the death benefit flows in, it's not included in their estate, and so we're wanting to get these irrevocable life insurance trusts set up so that ultimately it's going to be the owner of the policy, and the only asset inside of these trusts
Mm-hmm.
is going to be the policy itself, so that the bank can't come after anything but first and foremost the policy itself. And this policy is now outside of their estate,
Got
so
it.
when the death benefit comes in, it's not included in their estate, so it's going to come in 100% income and estate tax free.
Gotcha. Okay.
But when we set it up this way, I think this is a key distinction: is clients may like the strategy, but no client wants to take on debt, and they may look at, okay, this is great, but I don't want to take out this massive loan with the bank and have a 5, 10, $15 million loan that's going to affect my P&L, as we've got clients, a lot of clients in real estate, which that you don't want that affecting them,
Yep.
given how they do their business. And that's the beauty of this, is the borrowing party is not the insured, it is the trust.
Yep.
And by design, the only asset inside of that trust is the policy. So all of 13, 14 bar lenders, none of them will require a personal guarantee to be signed. It's a non-recourse loan to the insured. It's only recourse to the trust, so that this will not affect their P&L. They're not a party to the bank loan docs. The trust truly is the entity that secures the loan with the bank, and that's a big distinction for clients to understand.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And
So
it,
you said
and a big
non-recourse there, and no personal guarantees.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
So that's these are all 30 years of work to get to this,
Sure.
and get banks to give us those exemptions. Getting banks to allow us to capitalize interest, so they carry that, is another big exception we've been able to make. Getting bank spreads where they're at, that's 30 years of work to get there, in the book we own. So all of those layers of efficiencies really help us differentiate from, say, other groups out there. I know, I can count on one hand the top premium finance groups out there that do a really good job, and they do a really good job. But there's hundreds and hundreds of people doing premium finance. There's only about 3 to 5 top firms out there that are what I'm talking about.
Yeah, doing what you're doing.
And about
yeah.
3.
Yeah.
But once the trust secures the loan with the bank, it's pretty simple. The bank makes the premium payments to the policy. Upon death is where the trust, first and foremost, pays off the bank. So the bank is out, and then disperses the net benefits to the named beneficiaries.
Yep.
And that's kind of the nuts and bolts of premium finance, and you layer in some of the efficiencies that we've been able to create by being in the space for as long as we have. It's really how we can help differentiate from a poor transaction from what it is we do. So
that is impressive. And oh man, there's I know I try to ask some questions as we go. If there's one thing that you think somebody should take away from what you guys are doing, what would that be?
Well, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Sure.
And premium finance is very easy to sell, which is what the problem is. And you know, I would say anyone looking at this understand that it's a long term play.
Yep.
Anyone looking at this, really needs to do their due diligence and understand, you know, when they're looking at term sheets, understand, you know, where is that personal guarantee?
Yep.
Where does their bank spread compare to other groups out there?
Mm-hmm.
And really, really understand that there's never something for nothing. They really ought to be in that million mark for this to for premium finance to make sense, because anything below that, it's just you're putting all their eggs in one basket, and to me, it's something they should wait till they get there,
Yeah.
because you don't want to end up in what some of the horror stories look like. So,
Yeah.
I'd say, you know, really, it's exciting. It's to hear.
Yeah.
It's very attractive when it's being sold, but and it can do it can be an incredibly efficient transaction, but it has to be done correctly. And the only way to be done correctly is some of those basic parameters need to be met.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, Nick, I think you have another meeting, so I'm sorry I dragged you on here for longer than you were planning to be here.
No,
Um, but I mean, this is really helpful information, and I appreciate you
yeah.
giving the time to give us some of that. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, my email, and they can look on our website as well, which is
Yep.
www.tbgroup.org, or
Okay.
my email, which is my first name, Nick, last name, Burgess, at tbgroup.org. And again, it's .org,
Yep.
not .com. And a lot of people get that messed up, but I understand why.
So tbgroup.org. Got it. Well, Nick, thank you so much. This has
Yeah.
been very, very helpful. So I will make sure that any person that reaches out to me that wants to do this, they know who to contact, because it's clear that your group has several decades of experience and clearly knows how to structure deals to make sure that we don't end up in those horror stories that you touched on earlier, and that you're
Mm-hmm.
extremely conservative in your assumptions. Just even that 1.5 to two
Yep.
percent range, when we could even see just based on the data is sitting at like a 6.66 or something like that. Like that's a pretty sizable margin of error to make sure that we are avoiding any potential downside. So I really do
Yeah.
appreciate you giving us the time, and we'll make sure people follow up with you in the future.
I appreciate it, man. This was great. And we'll talk soon.
Cool, awesome. Thanks so much, Nick.
Bye bye.
Bye.